Welcome, everyone, to Reading Ireland, an evening of Irish literature, an Ireland semester event featuring members and friends of Sigma Tau Delta, the International English Honor Society. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Amy Gates, an associate professor of English. We want to thank Chad Stebbins for supporting Sigma Tau Delta's participation in the international theme semesters, including readings like tonight's and our annual fall book clubs featuring selections from the theme country or region. I also want to thank all of tonight's readers for their participation, including a few who had planned to join us but could not be here, and a few who stepped in to take their places. So thank you all for that. Before we begin, did I leave my... Oh. Sorry about that. Before we begin, I want to take my prerogative as tonight's host to briefly congratulate our Sigma Tau Delta members who will be graduating in December. This is always nice to know that people can make it and graduate. So among them are Bailey Harding, Hadley Hicklin, Cassidy Hunter, Pearson James, and Sarah Sylvie. And I know a few of them are here tonight. So would you come up and I will give you your honor cords right now. And now to Ireland. Human habitation on the island of Ireland probably began around 3000 BCE, although this is debated. By the early centuries of the Common Era, some 150 Celtic tribes, each with its own king, fought for land and power. St. Patrick and other churchmen brought Roman Catholicism to the island in the 400s and started a strong monastic tradition, but internal conflict and competition for power continued in Ireland. Invaders such as the Danish, the Vikings, and others took advantage of this disunity and attacked in the 9th and 10th centuries. By the 12th century, Pope Adrian IV, extending the religious domination of the Roman Catholic Church in Europe, issued a papal bull in 1155 that empowered King Henry II of England to conquer Ireland. The Anglo-Norman noble Strongbow led the first English invasion of Ireland in 1170, followed by Henry II himself 2 years later. The English established an administrative center in the city of Dublin and created an Irish Parliament in 1297. With the Protestant Reformation, the English desired to exert a centralized control over Ireland and establish a strong barrier between the colonized native Irish majority and the English rulers and settlers became more intense. When Henry VIII broke with Rome and was proclaimed by Parliament as the head of the Church of England in the 1530s, and subsequently established the Church of Ireland in 1541, headed by himself as king, a new religious angle further complicated the political conflicts over England's domination of Ireland. The next 400 plus years saw repeated protests, rebellions, and suppressions. By the late 19th century, a major issue was the quest for Irish home rule, a restoration of the Irish Parliament while remaining within the United Kingdom. The early 1900s saw an increased interest in cultural nationalism, and a new party, Sinn Féin, was established in 1906 with the goal of creating an Irish Republic independent of the United Kingdom. On Easter Sunday, 1916, a planned insurrection was thwarted, but the Irish Republican Army, or IRA, the paramilitary group that is associated with the political party Sinn Féin, rose on Easter Monday, April 24th, 1916, and seized control of key government buildings in Dublin, most famously the General Post Office, the center for communication and a symbol of empire. The Easter Uprising was a military failure, but it spurred the growth of Sinn Féin, who cited it as the origin of the Irish Republic. In 1921, the British divided the 6 northern counties from the south and held an election for the first Northern Ireland Assembly. The Anglo-Irish Treaty in the year following recognized the division of Ireland, with the southern 26 counties becoming the Irish Free State, with dominion status in the British Empire. During the 20th century, a devolved government was set up in Northern Ireland, while the Irish Free State evolved and proclaimed itself the Republic of Ireland in 1948. On the map, you'll see that the southern counties in the blue-green colors on the map make up what is now the Republic of Ireland, a sovereign nation. The 6 counties to the north in the more yellow or olive greens make up Northern Ireland, often called Ulster, which is part of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. In 1968, inspired by the civil rights movement in the United States, the Northern Irish Catholic minority launched a civil rights campaign to demand civil rights from the Protestant government, and peaceful demonstrations quickly turned to rioting and violence. The period between 1968 and 1998, known as the Troubles, witnessed 30 years of bloody conflict. All of this has been in grossly simplified terms, and so I will continue with grossly simplified terms. Unionists, sometimes called loyalists, the more hardline groups are loyalists, generally Protestant, wanted to remain affiliated with Great Britain, while nationalists and Republicans, mainly Roman Catholic, were committed to reuniting the 6 counties of Northern Ireland with the 26 counties of the Republic of Ireland. Despite the success of the Good Friday Agreement signed April 10th, 1998, the questions of who should have power and what it means to be Irish continue to this day. Throughout the fractious history, Irish writers have been writing Ireland. That is, trying to make sense of the differences and conflicts, finding the commonalities, and exploring Irish identity. Ireland's oldest literary traditions are found in the Irish language. The earliest recorded Irish Gaelic was found in 4th century inscriptions cut into wood and stone. 6th century manuscripts preserve Ireland's folklore. Among the earliest preserved poems is Elegy of St. Columba by Dallan Forgall. Indeed, Irish has the 3rd oldest literature in Europe after Greek and Latin, and the most significant body of written literature, both ancient and recent, of any Celtic language. The tradition of verse sagas and prose continued through the 9th and 10th and 11th centuries, preserving Ireland's legends. The 15th century saw the advent of the printing press in Europe, which broadened literary horizons, but the changing political landscape led to the near demise of Gaelic. From then on, Ireland continued its great literary tradition, but generally through English language Irish writers, many of whom wrote in exile. In the 19th century, a revival of Gaelic began, which continues to this day, particularly in the Republic of Ireland, and Irish language authors have taken their place on the world stage. Irish literature then encompasses both the Irish and the English languages, but our readings tonight will all be in English, I think, unless you surprise me. The South of Ireland Language Center notes that, and I quote from them, the historic influence of Irish language traditions, such as strong oral tradition of legends and poetry, has helped make much English literature in Ireland quite distinctive from that in other countries. From the older tradition, many Irish writers in English inherited a sense of wonder in the face of nature, a narrative style that tends toward the deliberately exaggerated or absurd, and a keen sense of the power of satire. In addition, the interplay between the 2 languages has resulted in an English dialect, Hiberno English, that lends a distinctive syntax and music to the literature written in it. They add, for a comparatively small island, Ireland has made a disproportionately large contribution to world literature in all its branches. Our readings tonight come from the entire island of Ireland and recognize the ancient literary tradition up through very recent writing by one of the many new immigrants to call Ireland home. Such a rich literary tradition offers us a wealth of possibilities for this evening. While we will be reading the work of many important Irish authors, we are leaving out so many others, many of whom you might expect to hear, but won't be. Samuel Beckett, Maeve Binchy, John Boyne, Emma Donoghue, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Mariah Edgeworth, Tana French, Lady Gregory, Sheridan Le Fanu, Colin McCann, Frank McCourt, Sean O'Casey, George Bernard Shaw, Bram Stoker, Oscar Wilde, on and on. Sorry, you won't be hearing those, but you will be hearing many other wonderful writers. We are pleased to provide a small taste of the rich Irish literary tradition tonight, and we hope that you are inspired to read on after you leave this evening. To begin, please help me welcome Bailey Harding.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Gates. So good evening. My name is Bailey Harding. I'm gonna adjust this. I'm currently a senior here at Missouri Southern State University studying secondary English education. I am currently in my student teaching semester and finding so much joy teaching literature and writing to 10th and 11th graders. In my time at MSSU, I have been in the honors program, an officer for the Student Missouri State Teaching Association, and best of all, Sigma Chi Delta. During my tenure with Sigma Chi Delta, I had the privilege to serve as MSSU chapter secretary and also Midwestern region student representative. I cannot thank the Sigma Chi Delta organization for all that I learned and all the opportunities that I received for professional and personal growth, kind of like tonight. An old Irish proverb says this: "He who travels has stories to tell." This is true for us all. If I were to go around this auditorium tonight and ask you all, will you tell me a story? We would be in for a treat. Some of us would tell funny stories, heartfelt ones, sad tales, funny anecdotes, inside jokes that many of us wouldn't understand, but we'd let you tell it anyway. We all travel through life, and because of this journey, we all have stories. If I was to tell a story, I may tell you a story my 92-year-old great-grandmother told me last week about her and my great-grandfather and their unlikely marriage. Because that story is one that has been on a journey from the 1940s in Arkansas when Ruby met Harold to 2023, where it found me sitting on the floor of Pine Place Assisted Living. Because I know the power of stories, I am honored to read to you tonight poetry by ancient Irish poets. The first poem I will read tonight is titled The Mystery by ancient Irish poet Amergin. This poem is dated before the 7th century and is theorized to be the oldest existing poem from the British Isles. Amergin is called one of the sons of Mill, who sailed to Ireland in ancient times. This poem is considered to have been spoken by Amergin as he set foot upon Ireland. The Mystery. I am the wind which breathes upon the sea. I am the wave of the ocean. I am the murmur of the billows. I am the ox of the 7 combats. I am the vulture upon the rocks. I am a beam of the sun. I am the fairest of plants. I am a wild boar in valor. I am a salmon in the water. I am a lake in the plain. I am a word of science. I am the point of the lance of battle. I am the God who created in the head the fire. Who is it who throws light into the meeting on the mountain? Who announces the ages of the moon? Who teaches the place where couches the sun, if not I? I will now read Pangur Ban, an anonymously written Irish poem from the 9th century. The manuscript from which this poem was found seems to be the notebook of an Irish monk due to the contents of the book. However, the author has never been accurately identified. In Pangur Ban, the poet compares his scholarly pursuits to his cat, who is happily hunting. Pangur Ban. I and Pangur Ban, my cat, 'tis a like task we are at. Hunting mice is his delight. Hunting words I sit all night. Better far than praise of men, 'tis to sit with book and pen. Pangur bears me no ill will. He too plies his simple skill. 'Tis a merry thing to see. At our tasks, how glad are we, when at home we sit and find entertainment to our mind. Oftentimes a mouse will stray in the hero Pangur's way. Oftentimes my keen thought takes a meaning in its net. 'Gainst the wall he sets his eye, full and fierce and sharp and sly. 'Gainst the wall of wisdom, 'gainst the wall of knowledge I all my little wisdom try. When a mouse starts from its den, oh, how glad is Pangur then. Oh, what gladness do I prove when I solve the doubts I love. So in peace our tasks we ply, Pangur Ban, my cat, and I. In our arts we find our bliss. I have mine and he has his. Practice every day has made Pangur perfect in his trade. I get wisdom day and night, turning darkness into light. Lastly, I will read The Feast of St. Bridget of Kildare. Saint Bridget is a Celtic figure and the only female patron saint. Saint Bridget Day is celebrated on February 1st annually in Ireland and was celebrated as a festival of fertility that marked the beginning of the Irish spring season. This poem recounts and discusses the feasts that associated the celebration of this holiday. I will also read the Heavenly Banquet, which acts as another version of the feast of Saint Bridget of Kildare. I should like a great lake of ale for the King of Kings. I should like the family of heaven to be drinking it through time eternal. I should like the viands of belief and pure piety. I should like the flails of penance at my house. I should like the men of heaven in my own house. I should like keys of peace to be at their disposal. I should like the vessels of charity for distribution. I should like caves of mercy for their company. I should like cheerfulness to be in their drinking. I should like Jesus, too, to be here among them. I should like the three Marys of illustrious renown. I should like the people of heaven, there from all parts. I should like that I should be a rent payer to the Lord, that should I suffer distress, he would bestow upon me a good blessing. And finally, the Heavenly Banquet. I would like to have the men of heaven in my own house, with vats of good cheer laid out for them. I would like to have the three Marys, their fame is so great. I would like people from every corner of heaven. I would like them to be cheerful in their drinking. I would like to have Jesus, too, here amongst them. I would like a great lake of beer for the King of Kings. I would like to be watching heaven's family drinking it through all eternity. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Zach Watson. I'm an English professor, and I'm chair of the Department of Language and Literature. I'm a Missourian by birth, and I hope to make myself a citizen of the world by education. It's my honor to read two poems tonight. They're both written by unlikely Irish patriots. They're both poets that are still respected to this day for their work, and the first one is Jonathan Swift. Swift is probably the greatest satirist ever to write in English. He was born in Dublin to English parents in 1667. He grew up poor, but he made it to Trinity College, where he was a student during the so-called Glorious Revolution of 1688. He moved to England, where his writing favored the Tory party in political controversies. And at the same time, he was moving up in the Church of England. As a reward for his political services, he was appointed Dean of St. Patrick's Cathedral in Dublin. In 1713, the government changed and Swift's career in England was over because he had written so many nasty things about the people who were in charge at that point. So he retreated to Ireland, where he spent the rest of his life. And I want to point out that his Irish identity is kind of odd. He took up for Ireland in politics and he defended it against England. But to really call him an Irish patriot in the sense of somebody who loved Irish people is not, I don't think that's exactly right. But his poetic ear was very strong. His verses are correct. He was known for keeping a little notebook of mispronounced words said by his friends when they were speaking in public. So I hope nobody's doing that tonight. His verses strike your ear with rhythm and meter and rhyme, and they're usually in these four-footed couplets. This is how he usually wrote. The tough thing about selecting from his poetry for tonight was that he was usually embroiled in one dispute or another, and most of his poems were written for the very social purposes of answering a charge or making a new one. Those poems are interesting, but they require more context setting than we have time for tonight. But fortunately for us, he was also a poetic innovator. His city poetry turned the country tools of pastoral and Georgic on urban landscapes, celebrating the sights and sounds of the city. In the early 18th century, pastoral poetry was popular. So those are those poems about shepherds and hills and nymphs and the good country life. Swift despised that kind of idealization. So he wrote this poem that was published in 1710, which describes the morning in his part of town, which then that was London because he hadn't had to leave yet. So he's just giving the incidents as they appeared. So this poem is one of the inspirations for a famous series of images that William Hogarth did, this one called Morning that's behind me. So you see, it's kind of a chaotic scene. So a description of the morning by Jonathan Swift. Now hardly here and there a hackney coach appearing showed the ruddy morn's approach. Now Betty from her master's bed had flown and softly stole to discompose her own. The slipshod prentice from his master's door had pared the dirt and sprinkled round the floor. Now Moll had whirled her mop with dexterous airs, prepared to scrub the entry and the stairs. The youth with broomy stumps began to trace the kennel edge where wheels had worn the place. The small coalman was heard with cadence deep, till drowned in shriller notes of chimney sweep. Duns at his lordship's gate began to meet, and brick dust Moll had screamed through half a street. The turnkey now his flock returning sees, duly let out o' nights to steal for fees. The watchful bailiffs take their silent stands, and schoolboys lag with satchels in their hands. Now I want to change gears and read one more poem. This one's by another poet with a challenging Irish identity named James Orr. Orr was born in 1770, and he was known as the Bard of Ballycarry, which is a seaside village in Northern Ireland. He was also called the Rhyming Weaver. He was a member of the Ulster Weaver Poets. These were all men who worked in the textiles industry who wrote poems published in their local papers. They were contemporaries of Robert Burns, you might know him, and they engaged in a similar brand of romanticism in their poetry. So that Irish region of Ulster has a complex cultural heritage. You know, the native Irish population was subjected to what we call the Plantation of Ulster. In the early 17th century, many Scottish Protestants with ties to England were settled there to civilize the region, with quotes around civilize. Settler colonialism does not always turn out as planned. Orr was angry about the injustices he observed in Ireland. Rural poverty, inequalities suffered by Presbyterians like him, and this is part of his complexity, right? He wasn't Catholic, but being against Ireland put him on the side of the Catholics against the English. So he was with Catholics, but not of Catholics. He joined the Society of United Irishmen and participated in the 1798 Irish Rebellion, which was an insurrection against the British Crown. The story goes that he sang this poem at one of their meetings. So as you listen to this patriotic poem, you'll hear some essentializing and reductive ideas about what it means to be Irish. He is calling them savages in the first line, but you should be sure that he meant this as a patriotic poem that would unite the Irish people against their oppressors. So this is The Irishman by James Orr, 1796. The savage loves his native shore, though rude the soil and chill the air. Then well may Erin's sons adore their isle, which nature formed so fair. What flood reflects a shore so sweet as Shannon great or pastoral Ban? Or who a friend or foe can meet, so generous as an Irishman? His hand is rash, his heart is warm, but honesty is still his guide. None more repents a deed of harm, and more forgives with nobler pride. He may be duped, but he won't be dared. More fit to practice than to plan, he dearly earns his poor reward and spends it like an Irishman. If strange or for you he'll pay, and guide you to where you safe may be. If you're his guest while ere you stay, his cottage holds a jubilee. His inmost soul he will unlock, and if he may your secrets scan, your confidence he scorns to mock, for faithful is an Irishman. By honor bound, in woe or wail, whatever she bids, he dares to do. Try him with bribes, they won't prevail. Prove him in fire, you'll find him true. He seeks not safety. Let his post be where it ought in danger's van. And if the field of fame be lost, it won't be by an Irishman. Erin loved land from age to age. Be thou more great, more famed and free. May peace be thine. Or shouldst thou wage defensive war, cheap victory? May plenty bloom in every field, which gentle breezes softly fan, and cheerful smiles serenely gild the home of every Irishman.
Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Cassie Lankford, a junior in literary studies. I plan to learn the inner workings of the publishing industry and ultimately run a publishing house of my own. I most look forward to reading manuscripts from undiscovered writers. I live in Miami, Oklahoma with my cat, Cerberus, and my dogs, Rain and Meg. I enjoy experimenting with various crafts, searching for interesting rocks, going to concerts, and naps. Literature is my happy place. My favorite genre is dystopian, but there are very few books I haven't savored as I read them. Tonight, I'll be reading short poems from James Clarence Mangan, William Butler Yeats, and Eva Gore Booth. James Clarence Mangan was born in Dublin in 1803. He was an Irish nationalist poet in the 1840s when such sentiments were dangerous to express. He translated works from multiple languages, including Gaelic, for publication. Despite his brilliance, he remained poor, but dedicated to his books and publishing thinly veiled political pieces until he died of cholera in 1849. The poem I'm reading tonight, Kathleen Ni Houlihan, is a loose translation of a Gaelic Jacobite lyric from the early 18th century. Mangan was skilled in the practice of retelling stories from mythology to illustrate the state of Ireland in the 1840s and wove in loose translations of folklore from other European regions as well. This was a popular method of political writers at the time. He enhanced his writing by casting Ireland itself as representative of the central female figure. Dark Rosaleen is his most known example of this style, and we can see how he was perfecting it in Kathleen Ni Houlihan. Long they pine in weary woe, the nobles of our land. Long they wander to and fro, proscribed, alas, and banned. Feastless, houseless, altarless, they bear the Exes brand, but their hope is in the coming too of Kathleen Ni Houlihan. Think not her a ghostly hag too hideous to be seen. Call her not unseemly names, our matchless Kathleen. Young she is and fair she is, and would be crowned a queen, were the king's son at home here with Kathleen Ni Houlihan. Sweet and mild would look her face, oh none so sweet and mild, could she crush the foes by whom her beauty is reviled. Woolen plaids would grace herself, and robes of silk her child, if the king's son were living here with Kathleen Ni Houlihan. Sore disgrace it is to see the arbitress of thrones, vassal to a Saxonine of cold and hapless bones. Bitter anguish wrings our souls with heavy sighs and groans. We wait the young deliverer of Kathleen Ni Houlihan. Let us pray to him who holds life issues in his hands, him who formed the mighty globe with all his 1,000 lands, girding them with sea and mountains, rivers deep and strands, to cast a look of pity upon Kathleen Ni Houlihan. He who over sands and waves led Israel along, he who fed with heavenly bread that chosen tribe and throng, he who stood by Moses when his foes were fierce and strong, may he show forth his might in saving Kathleen Ni Houlihan. Next is The Lake Isle of Innisfree by William Butler Yeats. Yeats was born in County Dublin in 1865. Though he lived in England for a significant portion of his teenage and early adult life, he held fast to his Irish identity and incorporated it into his work. He died in 1939. Tonight I'm reading The Lake Isle of Innisfree, which is widely printed and anthologized today. The poem refers to an unoccupied island in Ireland where the speaker reflects on the idyllic peace of a pastoral life and laments that he must abandon his reverie and return to his life in the city. I will arise and go now, and go to Innisfree, in a small cabin build there, of clay and wattles made. 9 bean rows will I have there, a hive for the honey bee, and live alone in the bee-loud glade. And shall I have some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow, dropping from the vales of the morning to where the cricket sings, there midnight's all a glimmer, and noon a purple glow, and evening full of the linnet's wings. I will arise and go now, for always, night and day, I hear lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore. While I stand on the roadway or on the pavement gray, I hear it in the deep heart's core. My last piece is by Eva Gore Booth. Eva Gore Booth was born in County Sligo in 1870 and lived until 1926. Her early work features Irish mythology and mysticism, as well as hints of the causes she advocated for. She wrote extensive political pieces advocating for various social causes, including women's rights and suffrage, and to improve conditions for the rural poor. William Butler Yeats took a special interest in her and worked with her to refine her poetry. She wrote tonight's selection, 1916, which is the year of the Easter Rising in Dublin, in 1918, the year the First World War ended. In 1916, the speaker describes a world of peace and beauty, which is destroyed by battle. Dew-pearled cobwebs glitter on green boughs. Beneath our feet, the grass is wet with dew. It seems as if this clear dawn must arouse our broken world to something strange and new. Deep in the high-built fortress of the pines, lost to her stars, dark night imprisoned lies. Near my hushed soul in peace, a white rose shines, like a new dream downflung from ancient skies. Alas, the bugles on the distant plain, the guns break forth with their insistent din. The dews of noonday leave a crimson stain on grass that all men's feet must wander in. O singing splendor of the morning furled about the souls of trees, the hearts of flowers, have you no dream of beauty for the world, this bitter, blood-stained world we men call ours?
Hi, my name is Melody Reed. I'm a junior here studying English with an emphasis on literary studies. I plan to attend law school upon graduation. I serve as president of Sigma Tau Delta, as well as Better Strangers, a medieval and early modern literary group. I was recently selected to present a paper at Kalamazoo's National Medieval Studies Convention in May, and I have my fingers crossed I'll be selected to present a paper at Sigma Tau Delta's annual convention in April as well. I'm also a member of Omicron Delta Kappa and the honors program. I discovered my love of Irish literature after taking a class on it and studying in Ireland for 2 weeks in May. John M. Synge was an Irish author, musician, and playwright. He was born in 1871 in a small town outside Dublin and died at the age of 38. Despite his short life and poor health, he is considered one of the great Irish playwrights of the Irish literary Renaissance. He attended Trinity College in Dublin and later studied language and literature at Sorbonne University in Paris. At the insistence of W.B. Yeats, Synge traveled to the Aran Islands in Ireland, and many of his works are deeply influenced by these islands, its people, and the features themes of loneliness and resilience. Despite his upper-class Protestant upbringing, his plays often portray working-class Catholic people, contain many elements of the pastoral, and highlight his fascination with the Irish language and the Irish English dialect. Synge also featured nature as not merely a setting for his plays, but as a force or character of its own, as seen in the sea's important role in Riders to the Sea. Synge was a part of the Irish literary Renaissance and sought to revive Irish literature and national pride. Synge's play, Riders to the Sea, is a one-act tragedy that follows Moira, a woman who has had 7 family members stolen from her by the sea, including her husband, father-in-law, and several sons. Like many of his plays, this work highlights the unique, almost poetic sound of the Irish dialect, as well as the human struggle against nature. Tonight, I will be reading the part of Moira. Myra and Bailey will be her daughters, Kathleen and Nora, and Dr. Watson will read the part of Bartley, the remaining son. It begins in a small fishing cottage, perhaps like the one he stayed in when he first visited the Aran Islands, as featured on the screen.
Where is she? She's lying down, God help her, and maybe sleeping if she's able. What is it you have?
The young priest is after bringing them. It's a shirt and a plain stocking were got off a drowned man in Donegal. We're to find out if it's Michael's they are. Sometime herself will be down looking at the sea.
How would they be Michael's, Nora? How would he go the length of that way to the far north?
The young priest says he's known the like of it. If it's Michael's they are, says he, you can tell herself he's got a clean burial by the grace of God. And if they're not his, let no one say a word about them, for she'll be getting her death, says he, with crying and lamenting.
Did you ask him would he stop Bartley going this day with the horses to the Galway Fair?
I won't stop him, says he, but let you not be afraid. Herself does be saying prayers half through the night, and the Almighty God won't leave her destitute, says he, with no son living.
Is the sea bad by the White Rocks, Nora?
Middling bad, God help us. There's a great roaring in the west, and it's worse it'll be getting when the tides turn to the wind. Shall I open it now?
Maybe she'd wake up on us and come in before we're done. It's a long time we'll be in the two of us crying.
She's moving about on the bed. She'll be coming in a minute.
Give me the ladder and I'll put them up in the turf loft. That way she won't know of them at all. And maybe when the tide turns, she'll be going down to see would he be floating in from the east.
Isn't it turf enough you have for this day and evening?
There's a cake baking at the fire for a short space, and Bartley will want it when the tide turns if he goes to Connemara.
He won't go this day with the wind rising from the south and west. He won't go this day, for the young priest will stop him, surely.
He'll not stop him, Mother. And I heard Eamon Simon and Stephen Feedy and Colum Sean saying he would go.
Where is he itself?
He went down to see would there be another boat sailing in the week. And I'm thinking it won't be long till he's here now, for the tide's turning at the Greenhead, and the hookers tacking from the east.
I hear someone passing the big stones.
He's coming now, and he's in a hurry.
Where's the bit of new rope Kathleen was brought in Connemara?
Give it to him, Nora. It's on the nail by the whiteboards. I hung it up this morning for the pig with the black feet was eating it.
Is that it, Bartley?
You do right to leave that rope, Bartley, hanging by the boards. It will be wanting in this place, I'm telling you, if Michael is washed up tomorrow morning, or the next morning, or any morning in the week, for it's a deep grave we'll make him by the grace of God.
I've no halter the way I can ride down on the mare, and I must go quickly. This is the one boat going for 2 weeks or beyond it, and the fare will be a good fare for horses, I heard them saying below.
It's a hard thing they'll be saying below if the body is washed up and there's no man in it to make the coffin. And I, after giving a big price for the finest whiteboards you'd find in Connemara.
How would it be washed up? And we were looking every day for 9 days, and a strong wind blowing a while back from the west and south.
If it wasn't found itself, that wind is raising the sea, and there was a star up against the moon, and it rising in the night. If it was 100 horses or 1,000 horses you had itself, what is the price of 1,000 horses against a sun where there is one sun only?
Let you go down each day and see the sheep aren't jumping in the rye, and if the jobber comes, you can sell the pig with the black feet if there's a good price going.
How would the like of her get a good price for a pig?
If the west wind holds with the last bit of the moon, let you and Nora get up weed enough for another cock for the kelp. Its hard set will be from this day with no one but one man to work.
Its hard set will be surely the day you're drowned with the rest. What way will I live and the girls with me, and I an old woman looking for the grave?
Is she coming to the pier?
She's passing the Greenhead and letting fall her sails.
I'll have half an hour to go down, and you'll be seeing me coming again in 2 days, or in 3 days, or maybe in 4 days if the wind is bad.
Isn't it a hard and cruel man won't hear a word from an old woman, and she holding him from the sea?
It's the life of a young man to be going on the sea, and who would listen to an old woman with one thing and she saying it over?
I must go now quickly. I'll ride down on the red mare, and the gray pony will run behind me. The blessing of God on you.
He's gone now, God spare us, and we'll not see him again. He's gone now, and when the black night is falling, I'll have no son left me in the world.
Hello, my name is Nancy Jamie. I am from Miami, Oklahoma. I am a junior and I am in the honors program. I am also a member of Sigma Tau Delta. I am an English literary studies major, so I have studied both British and American literature. This event tonight was a great opportunity to expand my horizons and explore Irish literature. Tonight, I will be reading a piece from Ella Young. Ella Young was born in the townland of Fina near Ballymena, County Antrim, Ireland. Young graduated in 1898 with a Bachelor of Arts degree in History, Political Economy, and Law from the Royal University of Ireland. A few years after graduating, Young visited a coal island to collect folklore about fairies. Ella Young joined Sinn Féin in 1912. According to her autobiography, she stored weapons smuggled from the IRA in her rented house in County Wicklow. Young became a lecturer in Irish myth and lore at the University of California in Berkeley. During this time, she published The Wondersmith and His Son, a tale from the golden childhood of the world. The stories included in this book were inspired by themes from Celtic myth with beautiful illustrations. Young would live in California until her death on July 23, 1956. The piece is called How the Goblin Sayer Got His Trade. It is a part of the Wondersmith and His Son collection. It was published in 1927, and the book received a Newbery Honor in 1928. It is also a part of the Joseph McGarrity collection in Distinctive Collections. I will be reading from the foreword as well as the first story. Foreword. To the children who will read this book. The Goblin Sayer, whose other name was Manannán, whose other name was Calian the Smith, was a great person long, long ago. He was a maker of worlds and a shaper of universes. Men said the stars were sparks from his anvil. White horses were sacred to him, and Lu's white hound, the sun, knew him as a master. People have forgotten about these things now, but in the thatched cottages in Gaelic-speaking Ireland and Scotland, they talk about him and his son Lu and his daughter Anya. It was in a cool island that I heard the first story about the Goblin. It was told to me by an old man of 80 as he was guiding me along a cool head, a wild promontory with cliffs descending 1,000 feet to the sea. He knew only 2 stories about the Goblin, but had heard that there were others. I made up my mind to get the others. It took me nearly 20 years to gather what I have in this book. How the Goblin Sayer Got His Trade. It was drawing towards night, and the Goblin had not given a thought to his sleeping place. All about him was sky, in a country that looked as if the people of the gods of Dana had been casting shoulder stones in it since the beginning of time. As far as the Goblin's eyes traveled, there was nothing but stone. Gray stone, silver stone, stone with veins of crystal and amethyst, stone that was purple to blackness, tussocks and mounds of stone, plateaus and crags and jutting peaks of stone. Wide, endless spreading deserts of stone. Like a jagged cloud far off, a city climbed the horizon. The Goblin sat down. He drew a barley cake from his wallet and some cresses. He ate his fill and stretched himself to sleep. The pallor of dawn was in the air when a shriek tore the sleep from him. He sat up. Great wings beat the sky, making darkness above him, and something dropped to the earth within hand reach. He fingered it, a bag of tools. As he touched them, he knew that he had skill to use them, though his hands had never hardened under a tool in his life. He slung the wallet on his shoulder and set off towards the town. As he neared it, he was aware of a commotion among the townsfolk. They ran hither and thither. They stared at the sky. They clung together in groups. "What has happened to your town?" said the Goblin to a man he met. "A great misfortune has happened," said the man. "This town, as you can see, has the noblest buildings in the world. Poets have made songs about this town. This town is itself a song, a boast, a splendor, a cry of astonishment. Men wonder at this town. The jinns, craning from battle-mented storm winds, have no pride left in them. They are shamefaced before this town. 3 master builders came to this town, builders that had not their fellows on the ridge of the world. They set themselves to the making of a marvel, a wonder of wonders, a cause of astonishment and envy, a jewel, a masterpiece in this town of masterpieces. This place that is jeweled like the tree of heaven and drunken with marvels. One pact alone, one obligation they bound with oath on the townsfolk. No living person was to come within the enclosure where they worked. No living person, man, woman, or child was to set eyes on them when they passed through the town with the tools of their trade in their hands. It was gaze for them to be looked on. We cloaked our eyes when they passed. We darkened our windows when they passed. We closed our eyes. 3 days they were working and passing through the town with the tools of their trade. We had contentment and luck and prosperity till the whitening of this dawn. Then a red-palled woman thrust her head forth. my curse on the breed and seed of her for 7 generations. She set the edge of her eyes on the 3 master builders. They let a screech out of them and rose in the air. They put the shapes of birds on themselves and flew away. My grief, 3 black crows. Now the stone waits for the hammer, and the hammer is lost with the hand that held it. The Goban tightened his grasp on the wallet, and his feet took him of their own accord away from the town. The tools have come to the man who can handle them, said the Goban to himself. But I'll handle them for the first time where there are fewer tongues to wag.
Tonight, I have the privilege of reading a second time a selection from James Joyce's novel, Ulysses. James Joyce was an Irish novelist born in 1882 in Dublin and died in 1941. He wrote many incredible works, including Ulysses, Dubliners, and Finnegan's Wake. He attended University College Dublin, where he studied languages, was an insatiable reader, and active member of the college's Literary and Historical Society. By the age of 18, his first work, a review of the play When We Dead Awaken, was published, and another essay was published the following year. This early success confirmed Joyce's aspirations to become a writer. Upon graduation, Joyce moved to Paris to write and study in the Saint Genevieve Library, where Joyce continued to travel extensively, living in Ireland, Croatia, and Rome. He wrote many works, but struggled to get his fiction published until 1916, when a portrait of the artist as a young man was published in America to great acclaim. After which, the American Little Review published serialized episodes of Ulysses until 1920. In 1922, Ulysses was published in its entirety as a novel. Ulysses is a modern parallel to Homer's Odyssey and is set in Dublin. It takes place in a single day and follows Leopold Bloom and his wife Molly, who are based on Ulysses and Penelope. It features in-depth character exploration through inner monologue and stream of consciousness writing style with a unique brand of humor. I will be reading an excerpt from chapter 4 and the final lines of the novel. Mr. Leopold Bloom ate with relish the inner organs of beasts and fowls. He liked thick giblet soup, nutty gizzards, a stuffed roast heart, liver slices fried with crust crumbs, fried hen cod's roes. Most of all, he liked grilled mutton kidneys, which gave to his palate a fine tang of faintly scented urine. Kidneys were in his mind as he moved about the kitchen softly, writing her breakfast things on the humpy tray. Gelid light and air were in the kitchen, but out of doors, gentle summer morning everywhere made him feel a bit peckish. The coals were reddening. Another slice of bread and butter. 3, 4, right. She didn't like her plate full. Right. He turned from the tray, lifted the kettle off the hob, and set it sideways on the fire. It sat there, dull and squat, its spout stuck out. Cup of tea soon. Good, mouth dry. The cat walked stiffly round a leg of the table with tail on high. Meow. Oh, there you are, Mr. Bloom said, turning from the fire. The cat mewed in answer and stalked again stiffly round a leg of the table, mewing. Just how she stalks over my writing table. Meow. Scratch my head. Meow. Mr. Bloom watched curiously, kindly the little black form. Clean to see. The gloss of her sleek hide, the white button under the butt of her tail, the green flashing eyes. He bent down to her, his hands on his knees. Milk for the pussins, he said. Meow, the cat cried. They call them stupid. They understand what we say better than we understand them. She understands all she wants to. Vindictive, too. Cruel, her nature. Curious mice never squeal. Seem to like it. Wonder what I look like to her. Height of a tower? No, she can jump over me. Afraid of the chickens, she is, he said mockingly. Afraid of the chook-chooks. I never saw such a stupid pussins as the pussins. Meow, the cat said loudly. She blinked up out of her avid, shame-closing eyes, mewing plaintively and long, showing him her milk-white teeth. He watched the dark islets narrowing with greed till her eyes were green stones. Then he went to the dresser, took the jug Hanlon's milkman had just filled for him, poured warm bubbled milk on a saucer, and set it slowly on the floor. Meow, she cried, running to lap. He watched the bristles shining wirily in the weak light as she tipped 3 times and licked lightly. Wonder, is it true if you clip them they can't mouse after? Why? They shine in the dark, perhaps, the tips. Or kind of feelers in the dark, perhaps? He listened to her licking lap. Ham and eggs? No, no good eggs with this drought. Want pure, fresh water. Thursday, not a good day either for a mutton kidney at Buckley's. Fried with butter, a shake of pepper. Better a pork kidney at Deluxe. While the kettle was boiling, she lapped slower, then licking the saucer clean. Why are their tongues so rough? To lap better all the porous holes. Nothing she can eat? He glanced round him. No. On quietly creaking boots, he went up the staircase to the hall, paused by the bedroom door. She might like something tasty, thin bread and butter she likes in the morning. Still, perhaps, once in a way. He said softly in the bare hall, I'm going round the corner, be back in a minute. And when he had heard his voice say it, he added, You don't want anything for breakfast? A sleepy, soft grunt answered, No, she didn't want anything. He heard then a warm, heavy sigh, softer, as she turned over and the loose brass quoits of the bedstead jingled. Must get those settled, really. Pity. All the way from Gibraltar. Forgotten any little Spanish she knew. Wonder what her father gave for it. Old style. Ah, yes, of course. Bought it at the governor's auction. Got a short knock. Hard as nails at a bargain, old Tweedy. Yes, sir. At Plevna, that was. I rose from the ranks, sir, and I'm proud of it. Still, he had brains enough to make that corner in stamps. Now that was far-seeing. His hands took his hat from the peg over his initialed heavy overcoat and his lost property office secondhand waterproof. Stamps, sticky back and pictures. Dare say lots of officers are in the swim, too. Course they do. The sweated legend as in the crown of his hat told him mutely. Plasto's high grade, ha! He peeped quickly inside the leather headband. White slip of paper, quite safe. On the doorstep, he felt in his hip pocket for the latch key. Not there. In the trousers I left it. Must get it. Potato I have. Creaky wardrobe. No use disturbing her. She turned over sleepily that time. He pulled the hall door to after him very quietly, more, till the foot leaf dropped gently over the threshold, a limp lid, looked shut. All right till I come back anyhow. And oh, that awful deep down torrent. Oh, and the sea crimson sometimes like fire, and the glorious sunsets and the fig trees in the Alameda Gardens, yes, and all the queer little streets, and the pink and blue and yellow houses, and the rose gardens, and the jessamine, and geraniums, and cactuses, and Gibraltar as a girl where I was a flower of the mountain, yes, when I put the rose in my hair like the Andalusian girls used, or I shall wear a red, yes, and how he kissed me under the Moorish wall, and I thought, well him as another. And then I asked him with my eyes to ask again, yes. And then he asked me, would I, yes, to say yes, my mountain flower. And first I put my arms around him, yes, and drew him down to me so he could feel my breast, all perfume, yes. And his heart was going like mad. And yes, I said, yes, I will, yes.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bethany Roberts, and I've lived in Joplin for the past 7 years. I'm now somehow already in my senior year, also as an honor student and Sigma Tau member. I will graduate this upcoming spring with a bachelor's in literary studies, a bachelor's in professional and technical writing, and a minor in creative writing. So yes, it's very safe to say that I am a literature fan. And since I'm apparently a glutton for punishment, I hope to take a small break after graduation before I pursue my master's degrees in theology and classical literature. So while I'm here, thanks to the resources at Missouri Southern, I've actually had the opportunity to have my poetry published in Bordertown, which is our very own literary journal, and to present my research in creative writing at our annual Sigma Tau Delta International Convention. I also had the opportunity to join a 2-week study abroad trip in England last summer. And on this trip, I had the chance to visit, and by visit, I mean very swiftly, literally run to a pub called the Eagle and the Child at Oxford University, and that was frequented by a man named C.S. Lewis. His full name was Clive Staples Lewis, but if you were one of his friends, you would have called him Jack. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why would he be considered an Irish author? Well, C.S. Lewis was actually born in Belfast, Ireland on November 29th, 1898, and he died in Oxford, Oxfordshire on November 22nd, 1963. He was known as a scholar, a novelist, and an author of around 40 books. Most of Lewis's work was on Christian apologetics, but he also wrote the infamous Chronicles of Narnia, a series of 7 children's fantasy books that may be his most popular works yet. Roger Courtney, the founder and first director of the Crescent Arts Centre Belfast, has spent much time with Lewis's work. Courtney has written many plays based off of C.S. Lewis and is currently working on a biography of the author himself. Courtney wrote the article C.S. Lewis, the Narnia Writer Inspired by Ireland, where he points out Irish landscapes that inspired the world of Narnia. However, Courtney writes, the only one Lewis personally highlighted as having inspired his idea of Narnia was the view of the Mourne Mountains from Ross River County down, which has its own fairy glen. If you look, I believe that's the background of this slide here. Courtney also points out that many scholars argue that Cair Paravel, the capital of Narnia, was inspired by the derelict cliff-top Dunluce Castle, which can be seen on the north coast of County Antrim near Castle Rock, where Lewis holidayed with his mother and brother several times as a child. Tonight's reading is from Prince Caspian, the 3rd book in the Chronicles of Narnia. In this passage, the 4 Pevensie children, Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy, come across the castle's ruins. I invite you to see this painting of Dunluce Castle by Eric Hesketh Hubbard here on the right as I read, and with the Pevensies, we will rediscover the ruins of their very own Cair Paravel. Chapter 2, The Ancient Treasure House. This wasn't a garden, said Susan presently. It was a castle, and this must have been the courtyard. I see what you mean, said Peter. Yes, that is the remains of a tower, and there is what used to be a flight of steps going up to the top of the walls. And look at those other steps, the broad, shallow ones, going up to that doorway. It must have been the door into the great hall. Ages ago, by the look of it, said Edmund. Yes, ages ago, said Peter. I wish we could find out who the people were that lived in this castle, and how long ago. It gives me a queer feeling, said Lucy. Does it, Lou? Said Peter, turning and looking hard at her. Because it does the same to me. It is the queerest thing that has happened this queer day. I wonder where we are and what it all means. While they were talking, they had crossed the courtyard and gone through the other doorway into what had once been the hall. This was now very like the courtyard, for the roof had long since disappeared, and it was merely another space of grass and daisies, except that it was shorter and narrower, and the walls were higher. Across the far end, there was a kind of terrace about 3 feet higher than the rest. I wonder, was it really the hall? Said Susan. What is that terrace kind of thing? Why, you sillies, said Peter, who had become strangely excited. Don't you see? That was the dais where the high table was, where the king and the great lord sat. Anyone would think you had forgotten that we ourselves were once kings and queens and sat on a dais just like that in our great hall. In our castle of Cair Paravel, continued Susan in a dreamy and rather sing-song voice, at the mouth of the great river of Narnia. How could I forget? How it all comes back, said Lucy. We could pretend we were in Cair Paravel now. This hall must have been very like the great hall we feasted in. But unfortunately, without the feast, said Edmund. It's getting late, you know. Look how long the shadows are. And have you noticed that it isn't so hot? We shall need a campfire if we've got to spend the night here, said Peter. I've got matches. Let's go and see if we can collect some dry wood. Everyone saw the sense of this, and for the next half hour they were busy. The orchard through which they had first come into the ruins turned out not to be a good place for firewood. They tried the other side of the castle, passing out of the hall by a little side door into a maze of stony lumps and hollows which must have once been passages and smaller rooms, but was now all nettles and wild roses. Beyond this, they found a wide gap in the castle wall and stepped through it into a wood of darker and bigger trees, where they found dead branches and rotten wood and sticks and dry leaves and fir cones in plenty. They went to and fro with bundles until they had a good pile on the dais. At the fifth journey, they found the well, just outside the hall, hidden in weeds, but clean and fresh and deep when they had cleared these away. The remains of a stone pavement ran halfway round it. Then the girls went out to pick some more apples, and the boys built a fire on the dais and fairly close to the corner between two walls, which they thought would be the snuggest and warmest place. They had great difficulty in lighting it and used a lot of matches, but they succeeded in the end. Finally, all four sat down with their backs to the wall and their faces to the fire. They tried roasting some of the apples on the ends of sticks. But roast apples are not much good without sugar, and they are too hot to eat with your fingers till they are too cold to be worth eating. So they had to content themselves with raw apples, which, as Edmund said, made one realize that school suppers weren't so bad after all. I shouldn't mind a good thick slice of bread and margarine this minute, he added. But the spirit of adventure was rising in them all, and no one really wanted to be back at school. Shortly after the last apple had been eaten, Susan went out to the well to get another drink. When she came back, she was carrying something in her hand. Look, she said, in a rather choking kind of voice. I found it by the well. She handed it to Peter and sat down. The others thought she looked and sounded as if she might be going to cry. Edmund and Lucy eagerly bent forward to see what was in Peter's hand, a little bright thing that gleamed in the firelight. Well, I'm jiggered, said Peter. His voice also sounded queer. Then he handed it to the others. All now saw what it was, a little chestnut, ordinary in size, but extraordinarily heavy because it was made of pure gold, and the eyes in the horse's head were two tiny little rubies, or rather one was, for the other had been knocked out. Why, said Lucy, it's exactly like one of the gold chessmen we used to play with when we were kings and queens at Cair Paravel. Cheer up, Sue, said Peter to his other sister. I can't help it, said Susan. It brought back, oh, such lovely times. And I remembered playing chess with fauns and good giants and the mer people singing in the sea and my beautiful horse and now, said Peter in a quite different voice. It's about time we four started using our brains. What about? Asked Edmund. Have none of you guessed where we are? Said Peter. Go on, said Lucy. I felt for hours that there was some wonderful mystery hanging over this place. Fire ahead, Peter, said Edmund. We're all listening. We are in the ruins of Cair Paravel itself, said Peter. But I say, replied Edmund, I mean, how do you make that out? This place has been ruined for ages. Look at all those big trees growing right up to the gates. Look at the very stones. Anyone can see that nobody has lived here for hundreds of years. I know, said Peter. That is the difficulty, but let's leave that out for the moment. I want to take the points one by one. First point, this hall is exactly the same shape and size as the hall at Cair Paravel. Just picture a roof on this and a colored pavement instead of grass and tapestries on the walls, and you get our royal banqueting hall. No one said anything. Second point, continued Peter, the castle well is exactly where our well was, a little to the south of the great hall, and it is exactly the same size and shape. Again, there was no reply. Third point, Susan has just found one of our old chessmen, or something as like one of them as two peas. Still nobody answered. Fourth point, don't you remember it was the very day before the ambassadors came from the King of Calormen? Don't you remember planting the orchard outside of the north gate of Cair Paravel? The greatest of all the wood people, Pomona herself, came to put good spells on it. It was those very decent little chaps, the moles, who did the actual digging. Can you have forgotten that funny old Lily Gloves, the chief mole, leaning on his spade and saying, "Believe me, your majesty, you will be glad of these fruit trees one day." And by Jove, he was right.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Grace Johnson, and I'm a senior here at Missouri Southern. I'm also a member of Sigma Tau Delta and a past co-PR officer. I'm also an English student teacher at McDonald County High School this semester, and I'm looking forward to a spring graduation. I'm an avid reader and writer of poetry, and tonight I am thrilled to share one of my favorite poets with you, Seamus Heaney. Seamus Heaney is widely recognized as one of the major poets of the 20th century. A native of Northern Ireland, Heaney was raised in County Derry and later lived for many years in Dublin. He was the author of over 20 volumes of poetry and criticism and edited several widely used anthologies. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1995 for, quote, works of lyrical beauty and ethical depth, which exalt everyday miracles and the living past, end quote. Heaney first taught at Harvard University, then later served as the Oxford Professor of Poetry. He died in 2013. Part of Heaney's popularity stems from his subject matter, Northern Ireland farms, its farms and cities beset with civil strife, its natural culture and language overrun by English rule. The New York Review of Books essayist Richard Murphy describes Heaney as, quote, the poet who has shown the finest art in presenting a coherent vision of Ireland, past and present, end quote. Heaney's poetry is known for its oral beauty and finely wrought textures. Often described as a regional poet, he is also a traditionalist who deliberately gestures back towards the pre-modern worlds of William Wordsworth and John Clare. Heaney's first poem I will share with you is called Digging. In this poem, published in 1966, the speaker reveals themselves through a comparison with the men of two previous generations and through a richly illustrated Irish landscape. Digging. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests, snug as a gun. Under my window, a clean rasping sound when the spade sinks into gravelly ground. My father, digging. I look down till his straining rump among the flower beds bends low, comes up 20 years away, stooping in rhythm through potato drills, where he was digging. The coarse boot nestled on the lug, the shaft against the inside knee was levered firmly. He rooted out tall tops, buried the bright edge deep to scatter new potatoes that we picked, loving their cool hardness in our hands. By God, the old man could handle a spade, just like his old man. My grandfather cut more turf in a day than any other man on Toner's bog. Once I carried him milk in a bottle, corked sloppily with paper. He straightened up to drink it, then fell to right away, nicking and slicing neatly, heaving sods over his shoulder, going down and down for the good turf, digging. The cold smell of potato mold, the squelch and slap of soggy peat, the curt cuts of an edge through living roots awaken in my head. But I've no spade to follow men like them. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests. I'll dig with it. Heaney's next poem I will share is the title poem of Heaney's debut collection, published in 1966. The title of this poem and of Heaney's first collection is called Death of a Naturalist. All year the flax dam festered in the heart of the townland. Green and heavy-headed flax had rotted there, weighted down by huge sods. Daily it sweltered in the punishing sun. Bubbles gargled delicately. Blue bottles wove a strong gauze of sound around the smell. There were dragonflies, spotted butterflies, but best of all was the warm, thick slobber of frog spawn that grew like clotted water in the shade of the banks. Here, every spring, I would fill jam potfuls of the jellied specks to range on window sills at home, on shelves at school, and wait and watch until the fattening dots burst into nimble swimming tadpoles. Miss Walls would tell us how the daddy frog was called a bullfrog, and how he croaked, and how the mammy frog laid hundreds of little eggs, and this was frog spawn. You could tell the weather by frogs too, for they were yellow in the sun and brown in the in the rain. Then one hot day, when fields were rank with cow dung, in the grass the angry frogs invaded the flax dam. I ducked through hedges to a coarse croaking that I had not heard before. The air was thick with a bass chorus. Right down the dam, gross-bellied frogs were cocked on sods, their loose necks pulsed like sails. Some hopped, the slap and plop were obscene threats. Some sat poised like mud grenades, their blunt heads farting. I sickened, turned, and ran. The great slime kings were gathered there for vengeance, and I knew that if I dipped my hand, the spawn would clutch it. The last poem I will share with you by Haney is called Blackberry Picking and was also included in his collection, Death of a Naturalist. Late August, given heavy rain and sun for a full week, the blackberries would ripen. At first, just one, a glossy purple clot among others, red, green, hard as a knot. You ate that first one, and its flesh was sweet like thickened wine. Summer's blood was in it, leaving stains upon the tongue and lust for picking. Then red ones inked up, and that hunger sent us out with milk cans, pea tins, jam pots, where briars scratched and wet grass bleached our boots. Round hayfields, cornfields, and potato drills, we trekked and picked until the cans were full, until the tinkling bottom had been covered with green ones, and on top big dark blobs burned like a plate of eyes. Our hands were peppered with thorn pricks, our palms sticky as bluebeards. We hoarded the fresh berries in the byre, but when the bath was filled, we found a fur, a rat-gray fungus, glutting on our cache. The juice was stinking too. Once off the bush, the fruit fermented, the sweet flesh would turn sour. I always felt like crying. It wasn't fair that all the lovely canfuls smelt of rot. Each year I hoped they'd keep, knew they would not. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Maya Daly. I'm a senior literary studies major here at Missouri Southern, and I'm also getting a minor in creative writing. I am a member of the honors program at MSSU, and I'm currently the secretary treasurer for MSSU's chapter of Sigma Tau Delta. And I am also an editor for the university's literary journal, Bordertown. This past May, alongside Melody, I also had the amazing experience of being able to study abroad in Ireland for 2 weeks. So I'm very happy to be here tonight reading and listening to some Irish literature. With that being said, tonight I'll be reading selections from two contemporary Irish poets, the first one being Paul Muldoon. Paul Muldoon was born in 1951 in a town in Northern Ireland called Portadown, and actually studied alongside Seamus Heaney at Queen's University in Belfast. He's quite a prolific writer, having authored over 30 collections of criticism, children's literature, and poetry, which has earned him the Pulitzer Prize in Poetry and the T.S. Eliot Prize. Currently, Paul Muldoon is a professor of creative writing in the Lewis Center for the Arts at Princeton University in New Jersey. The poem I'll be reading today is titled Anshaw, and it was originally published in 1980 in Muldoon's third poetry collection, which is titled Why Brownlee Left. The poem itself is made up of 3 14-line stanzas, and it tells the story of Commandant General Joseph Mary Plunkett growing up as a young boy and onto his career as an Irish Republican leader. Plunkett famously married his wife, Grace Gifford, just 7 hours before his execution by the British Army in 1916. This poem is powerful and affecting as it contains many important cultural symbols, including 3 specific trees, an ash, a willow, and a hazel tree, each marking Plunkett's growth into an influential man and leader. This is Anshaw by Paul Muldoon. When the master was calling the roll at the primary school and college lands, you were meant to call back Enshaw and raise your hand as your name occurred. Enshaw, meaning here, here and now, all present and correct, was the first word of Irish I spoke. The last name on the ledger belonged to Joseph Mary Plunkett Ward and was followed, as often as not, by silence, knowing looks, a nod and a wink, the master's drawl, and where's our little ward of court? I remember the first time he came back, the master had sent him out along the hedges to weigh up for himself and cut a stick with which he would be beaten. After a while, nothing was spoken. He would arrive as a matter of course with an ash plant, a sally rod, or finally the hazel wand. He had whittled down to a whiplash, its twist of red and yellow lacquers sanded and polished, and altogether so delicately wrought that he had engraved his initials on it. I last met Joseph Mary Plunkett Ward in a pub just over the Irish border. He was living in the open in a secret camp on the other side of the mountain. He was fighting for Ireland, making things happen. And he told me, Joe Ward, of how he had risen through the ranks to quartermaster, commandant, how every morning at parade, his volunteers would call back Enshaw and raise their hands as their names occurred. The second piece I'll be reading tonight was written by Yvonne Boland, who was born in Dublin in 1944. Boland's work tended to focus on women's complex roles inside Irish history and culture, informed by her own experiences of womanhood as a female poet when it was still not common to be one. In her lifetime, Boland published several poetry collections, a prose memoir titled Object Lessons, and worked as an anthologist and teacher. She served as the director of the creative writing program and taught English at Stanford University until her death in 2020. The poem I'll be reading tonight of Boland's is titled The Lost Land and was originally published in 1998 in a collection of the same name. This piece bridges the gap between Boland's Irish heritage and her personal experiences in parenthood. It first offers the reader a poignant look at a mother who is grieving her two daughters' absences, a grief that the speaker then connects to Ireland's complicated past with freedom and identity, which we've learned about a lot tonight. This poem is full of symbolism and metaphor as Boland creates meaningful connections between her motherland and motherhood. The Lost Land inhabits the intersection between personal and national as it explores important themes of loss and separation. This is The Lost Land by Yvonne Boland. I have two daughters. They are all I ever wanted from this earth, or almost all. I also wanted one piece of ground, one city trapped by hills, one urban river, an island in its element, so I could say mine, my own, and mean it. Now they are grown up and far away, and memory itself has become an emigrant, wandering in a place where love dissembles itself as landscape, where the hills are the colors of a child's eyes, where my children are distances, horizons. At night, on the edge of sleep, I can see the shore of Dublin Bay, its rocky sweep and its granite pier. Is this, I say, how they must have seen it backing out on the mailboat at twilight, shadows falling on everything they had to leave and would love forever. And then I imagine myself at the landward rail of that boat, searching for the last sight of a hand. I see myself on the underworld side of that water, the darkness coming in fast, saying all the names I know for a lost land. Ireland, absence, daughter. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Cassidy Hunter. I'm from a tiny town called Plato, Missouri. I'm an English major and an editor for the university's literary publication Bordertown, and I serve as the social media manager for Sigma Tau Delta. With this semester marking my final chapter in college, after graduation, I am set to begin my career as a technical writer. Now I will introduce our final piece for the evening. This excerpt comes from a story called Under the Awning by Mulatu Uchi Okori. It is the second part of her first book titled This Hostile Life, and reveals the different faces of racism in Ireland. The book was published in 2018 and was nominated for the Sunday Independent Newcomer of the Year Award and the Irish Book Awards. In 2019, the book was adapted into an opera by the Irish National Opera. Originally from Nigeria, Mulatu arrived in Ireland in 2006. When Mulatu started to write, she was an asylum seeker living in direct provision in Ireland. Direct provision is a system set up by the Irish government in 1999 as an emergency measure to house people seeking asylum while their application is assessed by the authorities. During this time, asylum seekers have little control over their own lives. The system initially was meant to take up to 6 months. Mulatu lived in direct provision for 8 years. In the past, the conditions of these accommodations have been under the scrutiny of human rights organizations, and the isolation of these communities creates social and racial tensions in Ireland. Under the Awning is a cleverly structured story within a story, subtly depicting the casual racism experienced by many people in Ireland. While I have tried to do the story justice, I haven't been able to include all of it, so if you're interested, I encourage you to find the rest of it. So this is an abridged version of Under the Awning. Everyone was already in as she had hoped. She sat on the first empty chair she saw, and when she had finished arranging herself, getting her pen and papers out, making sure her phone was switched off, zipping up her bag, she finally looked up and realized she was sitting directly opposite the leader. The large window behind him was slightly open. Outside, the weather was as unsettled as her disposition, as if it was ruminating on whether to rain or not. The sun had also not bothered to come out, leaving the sky an unpleasant gray. Today was her turn to present her work at the writers' group. The leader took a sip of a paper cup on the table in front of him. "Can you read us into your work?" he asked the girl, placing the cup back on the table. "Where would you like me to start?" she replied, hoping he would want an extract, only as he sometimes did. "Why don't you read it all?" he said, looking inquiringly around the room like the thought had just occurred to him. She bent her head and started to read, stuttering her words. "You stood under the awning outside the spar shop, staring straight ahead, barely moving, a pink plastic folder tucked under your arm, waiting for the drizzle to stop. You felt uncomfortable not standing at the bus stop on the edge of the pavement because you knew that back home, life would not stop over this small rain. Back home, rainfall meant other things to you rather than discomfort. It meant that the flat you shared with your mother's sister and her husband and your 3 cousins would not be stuffy. It meant that you wouldn't go to the well to fill the jelly cans in the flat with water. It meant that there would be corn sellers lined up along your street selling your favorite fresh roast corn the next morning. But here you were, desperate not to stand out. So you stood with the young woman pushing a crying toddler in a stroller, and the 2 older women and an old man under the awning of the spar shop, careful not to look directly at anyone, pretending not to be paying attention. You got on your bus, and after a while, it filled up, but the seat next to you remained empty, although there were few people standing in the small aisle. You stared out of the window, willing the bus to move faster. You walked into the house in which you lived with your mother and your 2 siblings, and saw your mother's friend, Auntie Muna, sitting on the sofa in the living room. Your mother asked you why you were late getting home from school, and you said without looking at her that you had to wait for the drizzle to stop. She responded with a familiar answer, silence. On the television, a man was talking about how the new American president was his relative. Auntie Muna said to your mother, that wasn't it interesting that the same people who were quick to claim this black man from America were the same people who said the black girl from London could not be a Rose of Tralee, at which your mother replied, "Is that so?" To which Auntie Muna then wondered aloud why she was even talking about the black girl from London when the African children born in the same country were not even accepted as Irish and do not hold the same passport as other Irish children. You sat curled up on the sofa Auntie Muna had been sitting on long after she had gone, and you thought of the day you had received the phone call from your mother that her application for family reunification had been granted and that you would be joining her and your siblings. You were so excited to join your mother and had imagined she lived in a big house and drove a big car. Your aunt and your cousins had thought so too, because of the money your mother sent every month for your upkeep. In the coming months, you would find out that your mother stacked shelves in a supermarket. She had been a manager at a telecommunications company before she left your father. In the college your mother enrolled you in to study travel and tourism, the girls wore a lot of makeup and looked so dark from their tanning they confused you sometimes. They asked you where you learned to speak English so well, and if it were true Africans lived in trees, and how they could never live in a hot country because they would melt. You muttered an empty response, desperate not to show your real emotions, but the sadness would still come when you got home and you would cry into your pillow. But it was after you met Dermot that you started to write. Your mother introduced him as the nicest Irishman she'd ever met. He told you eagerly that he had worked with a lot of charities in Africa. He spoke about his experiences through his work with the openness your pen pal letters used to have, which made you like him even though he was old, like your mother. And your smile reached your eyes for the first time in a long while because his were not guarded. You could tell him things you could not bring yourself to tell your mother. You had started with the small things first, and then you started telling him bigger things about your father and how, in your head, you had blamed your mother for leaving, and how you had always struggled with the anger and guilt, but couldn't talk about it because the first time you tried to say something, your mother had stood up from the bed and said, "It always had to be about you," and walked out of the room. You told him then about the little children down the street who persistently shouted Blackie at you whenever they saw you walking alone, and you wanted to tell him about the woman at church who told you that a traveler woman had said that travelers were no longer the lowest class since the arrival of Africans, and you wanted to tell him about the bus driver who dropped you 2 bus stops away from your stop because there was nobody else apart from you still in the bus. You wanted to tell him all these things, but you didn't. You cried for a long time on your bed after he left, confused about how alone you felt with so many people around you, and the next day, you went into the same spar shop and bought a diary. Thank you.